The Aristocrats archetype is very popular in Commander, and for good reason. Aristocrats decks are very strong and particularly resilient against interaction because a lot of their creatures want to be dying anyway. In addition, it is very hard to pick apart the game plan of an Aristocrats player because their board is filled with lots of small utility creatures and artifacts that are typically not very juicy targets to interact with. So if you have a green Stompy deck, it's easy to target the 8/8 trample, but with an Aristocrats player, you might have 3 or 4 different value pieces that make it very unappealing to interact with. And finally, Aristocrats decks tend to run a lot of Edict and Sacrifice effects, which means that they are good against Voltron decks and or game plans that only play very few creatures that are very high value. However, these strengths are balanced by the fact that Aristocrats wins are very evident to the table. You're not playing with a ton of hidden information. Typically, Aristocrats plans have a lot of their game pieces on board, which are visible to your opponents. In addition to that, it can be somewhat difficult to assemble all 3 pieces for an Aristocrats game plan that you typically need. You typically need your fodder to sacrifice on board, you need the sack outlet, and then you also need the payoff for sacrificing that thing. So there's some inherent inconsistency that can be found in these plans. In addition, I would say that this particular deck and many Aristocrats decks struggle to assemble a large amount of toughness on board, so that these decks tend to be weak to giant combat swingy type of decks, big stompy decks that are running trample and lots of evasion. So with that being said, I would like to talk about my particular take on the Aristocrats archetype, specifically looking at a vampire tribal flavor take on the Aristocrats archetype. My name is Nathan, you're watching yet another Salty Productions Deck Tech. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like on it, subscribe if you want to see more, and if you want to check out my Patreon link down below, that's how you can support me and my channel. So when we talk about the Aristocrats archetype with a vampire theme, we have to address the elephant in the room, which is Edgar Markov. Now, Edgar Markov is simply the best vampire commander, also possibly the best commander for the Aristocrats archetype because he will always guarantee that you have something to sacrifice on board. And I'm assuming that you clicked on this video because you probably don't want to be playing with Edgar Markov because he's either A, too boring, too powerful, or too expensive, or all of the above. So instead, I dropped the red out of the Mardu color combination, and instead we are running an Orzhov Vampire Aristocrats deck led by Bartolomé del Presidio, which is a 2-mana 2/1 Vampire Knight, and basically he is just going to act as a free outlet in the command zone. If you guys have watched my deck techs, you know that my philosophy is always to run some sort of consistency engine, be that either ramp or card draw, in the command zone so that we always have a game of Commander that we can actually play. So Bart is doing the same thing here for Aristocrats by always being the sack outlet in the command zone, which means that we don't need to run any sack outlets in our 99, and instead we can actually run the cool payoffs or the cool fodder pieces instead of gumming up the 99 with boring sack outlets like Viscera, Seer, and its ilk. So let's jump into some macro statistics. This deck clocks in at around $550. This is a no budget brew. The average CMC of the mana cost here, if we actually jump to our mana curve, is about 3.1. Moxfield is going to display a wrong mana cost here because we have several MDFC lands that are classified as 0 CMC, but the actual mana average CMC of this deck is 3.1. And our land analysis, we are running 27 white producers, 30 black producers, 5 tapped lands, 32 untapped lands, 10 life loss lands, and 15 utility lands. With that out of the way, let's jump to the 99 analysis. Starting us off with a ramp category here, we are running Black Market Connections because this will always create mana, card draw, and a body to sack, and we are running a lot of life gain effects in this deck. So the life loss to create the 3/2 changeling is actually not that big of a deal compared to other decks. You'll see that we are just going to be running a ton of life gain, and so this deck can survive a lot of punishment to the life total. Herald's Horn is in here. You could definitely replace this with an Urza's Incubator, but I do like this for the extra card draw effect, and typically with Herald's Horn, I consider it a quote-unquote success if Herald's Horn is able to draw me at least one card. We're playing it primarily for the creature spell discount there, but if we consider the fact that we're going to pay 2 mana to discount all of our vampires by 1, and then the extra part of the cost here, the extra 1 mana will draw us an additional card, that's where I'm getting that math from, that we're happy to draw hopefully 1 card off of Herald's Horn, but if we draw more than that, that is just gravy upside. We are also running Legion's Landing because it makes a body to sacrifice and will also transform into a land, which can then make us more tokens, although that ability to make tokens is quite expensive, and I anticipate activating that rarely. We're really just looking for the land mana producing effect there. Pawn of Ulamog will create Eldrazi spawn creature tokens whenever it or another non-token creature dies on our battlefield, so this can actually go off super hard if we have a lot of creatures on board ready to be sacrificed. Pitiless Plunderer, again, is going to be one of the best cards to see in the early game. This card absolutely goes off hard because every creature that dies, including tokens, will make us a mana of any color via the treasure there, which is pretty amazing. We are running Soul Ring because it can be searched off of the Urza Saga, and Springleaf Drum as well as another target for Urza Saga. And I actually do like Springleaf Drum in this deck because we are typically not going to be swinging with Bartolomé at all, so this is pretty easy to just tap a token that's going to be sacrificed anyway to make a mana, just a pretty easy source of ramp there with Springleaf Drum. Then we will move to our fodder category, which is going to be the next category of card that we would really like to see in the early game. Bloodghast is simply going to be the best creature or fodder piece to see in our opening hand because it will always come back to the battlefield on landfall. Bloodline Keeper is going to be a little bit clunky, admittedly, at 4 mana. It can tap every turn to create us a 2/2 vampire creature token with flying, and it can transform relatively easily if we control 5 or more vampires to give all of our vampire creatures +2/+2, and it can continue to pump out those vampire creature tokens. Just a word here. There are more efficient ways to make tokens that are out there in the Commander format, but we're going really heavy into the vampire theme for this deck, and so there's actually a limited number of repeatable token generators that we can run that care about specifically vampire tokens or our vampires themselves. So, like I said, this is a little bit clunky at 4 mana. We could be running something more efficient like Call the Coppercoats or any sort of big token generator that you might find in white, but again, we really want to be playing vampires in this deck. Call to the Feast falls into that same category here. For 4 mana, we can create 3 tokens, which in this particular deck, we are really looking for all of the ways to make vampire tokens. There's also a 3 mana version of this effect that creates 2 1/1 tokens that have lifelink as well. But you know, here again, we're really looking for the vampire flavor, and we really want to just be able to make those bodies so that we can start sacrificing them in the mid game. And so that's why we run Call to the Feast here. Carrier Thrall is awesome because when it dies, we can create basically a mana via the Eldrazi Scion creature token. Charismatic Conqueror is quite expensive, but it is the best token generator in the entire deck. This is going to be pumping out 1/1 white vampire creature tokens with lifelink all day long. Dusk Legion Zealot is within the fodder category because we're just going to play it, draw a card, and then we can sacrifice it and not care because it has replaced itself. Elenda's Hierophant will die and create X 1/1 white vampire creature tokens with lifelink, where X is its power, which is pretty nice. Elenda the Dusk Rose, similar thing here. When it dies, create X 1/1 white vampire creature tokens with lifelink, where X is its power. March of the Canonized is going to mostly be either a 4 or 5 CMC spell, which is how I sort of think about this in my head, because X will probably be 2, where we'll be able to create 2 1/1 white vampire creature tokens with lifelink for 4 mana, and then it is relatively easy past turn 5 or turn 6 to get the devotion minimum to trigger this to create those 4/3 white and black vampire demon creature tokens with flying. Mutter of Dusk, another great card to see in our opener because when it dies, we make another vampire, and we absolutely love this because if we were to saw this in half, for example, then we can get more of these creatures and they will just die into more tokens, which is exactly what we want. We just want to be pumping out as many bodies to sacrifice as we possibly can. Maverick Fane is going to be another great repeatable generator because whenever one or more non-token vampires we control attack, we get to create a 1/1 vampire token. Oathsworn Vampire is going to be similar to Bloodghast, but it will be able to be cast from our graveyard if we gained life this turn, which is very much easy to do because almost all of our burn payoffs have some sort of life gain attached to them. Preacher of the Schism is going to also create vampire tokens pretty consistently as long as we attack the player with the most life or tied for the most life. or it can also draw us cards, but it is also a death touch 2/4, which is really nice because we can hold that back and block a lot of the stupid utility creatures that will come at us in the early game. Sanguine Evangelist will ETB or die to create a 1/1 token, which is just going to be pumping out more bodies there. And then we have Saw in Half, which is in this category because it basically gives a creature, whenever it dies, create 2 copies of it, where half the power and toughness, blah, blah, blah. We don't care about that. Really what we just care about is that this will, at instant speed, be able to create us 2 copies of a creature and activate its death trigger. And it also, in an emergency, can be used as a removal spell to at least fog a creature for a turn, although I would highly dissuade you from doing so because that creature, which is probably going to have a lot of activated abilities and a lot of value attached to it, is probably going to be generating more value if there's 2 of them on the field. Or you could maybe use it to blank somebody's commander and just have the second copy die to the legend rule. That is also another cool use of this card, but typically we're just going to be casting this on our own creatures in order to get their death triggers and have them be brought back. Once we have our fodder pieces on the battlefield, how do we actually capitalize on that? So Bart is going to be obviously our sack outlet in the command zone, and once we have Bart on the field plus all of our fodder, what we want to be doing is playing cards like Bastion of Remembrance, which will drain our opponents for 1 and gain us 1 whenever a creature we control dies, and it comes with a body itself, which is super solid. Also is an enchantment, so it's very sticky. Blood Artist is a vampire itself and will trigger on any creature dying, but only burns a target player. Cruel Celebrant is a vampire and will drain each opponent. Funeral Room and Awakening Hall, we care about both sides of this card, which is absolutely excellent. The Funeral Room is going to basically be a Bastion of Remembrance, but not come with that body, and Awakening Hall will reanimate all of the creature cards in our graveyard, which is absolutely amazing. Marionette Apprentice is going to be another drain each opponent, but it does not come with the life gain component there. Sir Conrad the Grim will drain each opponent for 1 every time another creature dies or a creature card is put into a graveyard from anywhere other than the battlefield, or a creature card leaves our graveyard. And we can activate it ourselves for 2 mana. Vein Ripper is just a cool vampire. It is a little bit clunky and expensive at 6 mana, but it does have ward sack a creature, and whenever a creature dies, target opponent loses 2 and you gain 2. So creatures die all the time in Commander, and I set up the removal package to specifically trigger a lot off of basically having all of our opponents sacrifice creatures so that we can get as many death triggers as we possibly can. Vengeful Blood Witch is the worst burn payoff in the deck because, much like Blood Artist, it costs 2 mana. However, Vengeful Blood Witch only cares about creatures dying on our side of the field instead of anywhere on the field, and it only burns target opponent. But it is a vampire, and so we run it anyway. Vindictive Vampire is going to be another drain effect for each opponent, but it is going to cost 4 mana. But it is a vampire, again, so we run it. And then finally, we have Classic Zulaport Cutthroat. Whenever another creature you control dies, we drain each opponent and gain 1 life. If those triggers weren't enough for you, let's double them with Haunted One, where we can actually tap Bartolomé, who is going to have a pretty sizable body, and also can be tapped with Springleaf Drum, as I mentioned before. And Haunted One will say, commander creatures you own have, whenever this creature becomes tapped, it and other creatures you control that share creature type with it each get +2/+0 and gain Undying until end of turn, which means that we can sacrifice them and have them come back to the field with a 1/1 counter on it. Now, notably, we cannot bring back tokens, so this is really only going to help us with our non-token creatures that want to be sacrificed, but it is a cool combat buff as well if we do want to swing out via combat, and is some nice protection for Bartolomé. Roaming Throne, we can double our vampire triggers across the board, and then Taste of Karlov is also going to double all of our creature death triggers. Within our draw category, we are running a lot of draw effects here because Aristocrats decks are very hungry for cards because it wants to sacrifice the cards that we put onto the battlefield. So therefore, we are running Body Count, which is very efficient and will most of the time cost 1 mana as long as an opponent lost life this turn. Again, we are a burn deck at its core. Draw a card for each creature that died under your control this turn. Absolutely hyper efficient draw spell here with Body Count. Clive Elenio, First of the Blessed. Whenever you attack, target attacking vampire that isn't a demon becomes a demon in addition to its other types. Again, whenever the creature dies, draw a card and create a tap 4/3 white and black vampire creature token with flying. So I look at this as basically drawing a card and creating a 4/3 token to sacrifice every single turn, as long as we attack with a vampire, which is pretty trivial. Desperate Measures is going to basically be a 1 mana draw 2, which is better than the Village Rites type of effects, because this simply says target creature gets +1/-1, so it can possibly kill a 1/1, but it will say whenever it dies under your control this turn, draw 2 cards, which means we can still get the effect off of Bartolomé to put a 1/1 counter on him. Dire Sight is in the deck really to fix our early game if we are not drawing enough lands. I am more and more putting this into every single black deck, because the Surveil 2, then drawing 2, allows us to dig at least 4 cards into our deck and will help us really fix our lands into our hand, so that we continue to move smoothly into the mid game. High Society Hunter is a vampire that primarily we care about. It says whenever another non-token creature dies, draw a card, and it can also grow itself by sacrificing creatures when it attacks, which is pretty nice. Morbid Opportunist will basically draw a card at the very least 1 per turn cycle. Whenever one or more other creatures you control die, draw a card. Or I'm sorry, not even we control, just any creature on the battlefield. So creatures die all the time in Commander, and this will trigger pretty much every single turn cycle at the very minimum. Night's Whisper, draw 2, lose 2. Again, this is just super good just to continue to fix our land drops in the mid game. Similar reason we are running Sign in Blood. Skull Clamp can be searched off of Urza's Saga and is the best draw spell arguably in the deck. For 1 mana, we can basically draw 2 cards at will. We are running a Species Specialist to name vampires. Whenever a vampire we control dies, we may draw a card. And technically, I guess it says any vampire on the field, but again, we're probably going to be the only vampire creatures on the battlefield. Trouble in Pairs was recently delisted from the Game Changers list, and therefore we can run it in a bracket 2 deck. So this is going to be the best card draw engine in white, hands down, within the entire format. Welcoming Vampire can also draw us cards pretty much 1 per turn cycle. Unfortunately, this does not get doubled up with Roaming Throne because it only triggers once each turn, but this is going to be just a great card draw engine. Similar to our card advantage effects, we have a couple of reanimation effects, which are both mana and card advantage. We are running Redemption Choir, which I'll actually scroll up for just a moment here. 4 mana, 3/3 with lifelink. Whenever it enters the battlefield or attacks, if you control 3 or more creatures with different powers, return target permanent card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield, which is very much easy to do because the Redemption Choir itself will be a 3/3. We're probably going to have a 1/1 token on the battlefield, and then we are also going to have Bart on the battlefield, which is going to probably be at least a 4/4 if it has sacrificed at least 2 creatures throughout the game. So Redemption Choir, very easy to actually reanimate creatures from our graveyard onto the battlefield here. And then we also do run Victimize because we do get a sacrifice effect and we get to return 2 creatures from our graveyard to the battlefield tapped, which is just great mana and card advantage. So we've talked a lot about our game plan, which is our offensive strategy. Let's jump to our defensive strategy here, starting us off with the Cursed Marauder, which will force our opponents to sacrifice a non-token creature and trigger all of our death triggers, which is pretty great. Captivating Vampire can take control of a creature if we tap 5 untapped vampires we control, which is very much easy to do. And then once we actually get those vampires tapped to gain control of that creature, then we can just sacrifice those vampires and not even have to think about them afterwards, which is pretty great. So just great threat here with Captivating Vampire, and this is going to be a must-kill target for your opponents. We are also running Henrika Domnathi to force an edict effect on our opponents, and it can also draw us cards, and once it has drawn that card and is ready to transform, honestly, it is a 3/4 Flying Death Touch lifelinker, but we don't really care about the rest of this body, so after it transforms, we can pretty much sacrifice Henrika as well. We are running a Kaya's Guile because it will not only force our opponents to sacrifice a creature, but we can also hit graveyards if we do need to get rid of some graveyards on the battlefield. But more importantly, we will be able to create that 1/1 spirit creature token, which we can then sacrifice to our various effects. Patron of the Vein can ETB destroy target creature, and then it can buff our vampires. Ruthless Lawbringer will sacrifice a creature to destroy target non-land permanent, which is good. This is really the only way we can deal with artifacts and enchantments in the deck. The deck is mostly focused on creature removal, removal. So I will say that's maybe a weakness that could be shored up within the deck. Perhaps you could consider running Unexplained Absence, maybe over Henrika Domnathi, for example. That will be able to hit anything on the field, but I just wanted to keep to the vampire theme here. Teysa Orzhov Scion can actually make us tokens and remove things, so pulling double duty here. It is a little bit of a setup though. It's kind of a do nothing 3 mana until we can actually start making tokens, or start sacrificing things, I should say, via after we've made the tokens. But it can actually exile target creature and get rid of them permanently, which is kind of nice. Then we are running the new Will of the Abzan, which is going to allow us to force our opponents to sacrifice the creature with they control with the greatest power and lose 3, and this will also be able to reanimate a creature. So just pulling double duty here with Will of the Abzan. And then Will of the Mardu is going to make us tokens and be able to remove a thing off of the board here if we control Bart, which is going to be pulling double duty as well. If I scroll up here, we are also running a couple of mass disruption spells here with Living Death, also one of the best reanimation spells within this particular deck. For only 5 mana, we basically swap our board and our graveyard, and also for our opponents as well. This is going to be just one of the best reanimation cards to draw. Olivia's Wrath is going to be a one-sided board wipe. Now, this does depend on us having a board. In order to clear the board, you could consider running Kindred Dominance in place of Olivia's Wrath here, but I am running it because it's a little bit more efficient, and Kindred Dominance is a little bit more expensive. So it just depends on kind of what you're looking for here. If you want a more efficient board wipe, but you have to have the board set up to do it, versus Kindred Dominance is a no strings attached, but it will be 7 mana to do that. The Meathook Massacre is going to be pulling double duty as both a board wipe and a burn payoff. This card is just simply one of the best cards to see in the deck. In either the early game or the late game, you can definitely cast it for only 2 mana and be happy with that effect as is, even without the -X/-X ability there. And then finally, we are running one protection piece in the form of Ink Shield. Again, if you're in like bracket 3, this could be replaced with a Teferi's Protection, perhaps even a Perch Protection if you wanted to make those 4 bird tokens to have something to sacrifice. But we are running Ink Shield because this is a game-winning spell if we're able to swing with those Inklings and, stop a bunch of damage. The turn after then, once we get in for those Inklings with combat damage because they have flying, we can then sacrifice all of them as well to then deal a bunch of damage. So Ink Shield, I feel it is a little bit telegraphed because you're holding up 5 mana and it's pretty obvious to any experienced commander player what you're doing there. But it does come with a ton of bodies to sacrifice later on after we swing with them that have evasion. So really at its maximum effect, this is a game-winning spell, and that is why we run it to create, all of that combat damage plus have more fodder to sacrifice. All right, and finally, let's take a quick spin through the mana base. This mana base is optimized for pit production, but we are able to get in a lot of utility effects because we are only running 2 colors. Aghanim's Awakening is going to be a mass reanimate spell that is a land on the back side. In any deck that cares about its graveyard, I run Aghanim's Awakening just straight up. It's just one of the best lands in our entire deck. And then we are running Bleachbone Verge for pit production, Bogart Trawler to deal with graveyards, but it does enter as a land untapped on the back side. Bright Climb Pathway for pips, Cavern of Souls for pips, and also can stop counter spells. Caves of Koilos for pips, Command Tower for pips, Desolate Mire for pips. Iganjo can help us against attacking or blocking creatures. Exotic Orchard for pips, Fabled Passage for pips. Fell the Profane is a nice removal spell. For 4 mana, it is a little bit expensive to destroy target creature or planeswalker, but again, it's an untapped land on the back side, and so we run it. Fetid Heath for pips, Godless Shrine for pips can be searched out via our fetch land as well. Horizon of Progress for pips, and it has a nice piece of utility here because we can sack it to draw a card, and we can actually ramp ourselves as well, which is kind of nice. Isolated Chapel for pips, Malakir Rebirth to help us bring back our creatures that are going to be sacrificed, but it is a tap land on the back side, so it does come with a little bit of a cost here in our tempo, but I do really like Malakir Rebirth in an Aristocrats decks because we're just going to want to be reanimating our creatures. Marsh Flats, fetch land, Minas Tirith for some card draw, Orzhov Basilica for some pip production and can help us draw a land in quotes. Path of Ancestry for scrying a whole lot because we're in a Vampire Tribal deck. Phyrexian Tower is going to be making a ton of mana because we can sacrifice a creature to add black. 1 plains. We are running a total of 4 basics, by the way. We'll cover the basics in just a second here because they are split between actually snow-covered plains and snow-covered swamp. Now that I think about it, we can probably switch these back to just normal plains and normal swamp because I originally had Field of the Dead in the deck at some point, but I believe I took it out because once it became a game changer, I didn't really want it to be solidly bracket 3, although again, the power level of this deck is probably low bracket 3. Prismatic Vista for pips, Reflecting Pool for pips, Shadowy Backstreet can be searched out via our fetch land and be that turn 1 Surveil, Shattered Sanctum for pips, Silent Clearing for pips, and also can draw us a card if we are flooded. 2 basics, 3 basics actually with these swamps here. Takanuma can draw some cards. 3 Tree City, it's relatively easy actually to make a lot of tokens in this deck, and I originally had Nykthos Shrine to Nyx in the deck, but I noticed that it was easier to make tokens than to produce a lot of mana pips. You could definitely maybe replace a basic with Nykthos Shrine to Nyx and be totally fine, but I did want to run 3 Tree City instead of Nykthos just because it's more easy to make that big mana. Urza Saga can help us search up our Skull Clamp, Soul Ring, or our Springleaf Jump on that 3rd trigger. Also gives us a token to sack if we care about that. Fault of Champion for pips, Voldaren Estate for pips as well, and cares about Vampire Tribal, which is pretty nice, and then Witch Enchanter to deal with artifacts and enchantments. All right, and that will conclude my Bartolomé del Presidio Orzhov Vampire Aristocrats deck tech. There are a couple of notable exclusions within the deck I'll just touch on really quick. A couple of really last-minute cuts. I did cut Flare of Malice and Soul Shatter in place of more removal spells that would generate us more tokens. I could definitely see myself though swapping those in because they're just so good at destroying your opponent's creatures for creatures that they care about. Additionally, at the last minute, I did cut Ashnod's Altar and Phyrexian Altar. Those are 2 quite expensive cards. Again, we don't really care about budget that much, but when we look at those sack outlets, I just felt like they were overlapping too much with Bart in the command zone, because if I were to draw a Phyrexian Altar, yes, it does allow you to go off in terms of generating a lot of mana, but it makes Bart basically useless in the command zone. So those are all 2 other cards that I could definitely see swapping into the deck just to have backup sack outlets. You could also consider Yawgmoth Thran Physician to draw cards and perhaps remove, X1s off of the board. I could definitely see myself swapping those in. I'm not really sure what I would cut for them because everything in the deck is so like jam-packed already. It's really hard to find room in the deck at this point to include those. Maybe I would actually cut maybe like Roaming Throne or Teysa or something for maybe some sack outlets, being that they do allow you to go off. But I don't know. I really just like Roaming Throne doubling all of our triggers in addition to Teysa. So anyway, those are just some considerations for you all. Let me know if I missed any obvious cards in the deck in the comments below. I would love to hear any of your suggestions. And as always, if you enjoyed this video, leave a like on it, subscribe if you want to see more. And if you want to support me and my channel, you can check out my Patreon linked down below. Finally, I will have a Goldfish and Companion video where I will play test the deck a couple of times, assuming low and high amounts of interactions, so you can see how the deck actually performs and by what turn it aims to win by. So that is the video, guys. Thank you all for watching once again, and hopefully we'll see you all in the next one.